Have you ever been deeply disrespected by someone you trusted, maybe even loved, and everything in you wanted to scream, to confront, to let them know how much they crossed the line? But something held you back. Maybe you swallowed your words. Maybe you walked away. And they thought they won. They thought your silence meant weakness. But what if I told you that silence was actually your most powerful move? See, we've been taught wrong. The loudest one in the room isn't always the strongest. Sometimes the one who speaks last speaks loudest. And sometimes the one who says nothing at all leaves the deepest impact. Here's the problem. Most people believe that silence equals surrender. They think that if you don't fight back, you're broken, passive, powerless. That's the myth. The truth? Your silence after the disrespect doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've risen above it. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly why. You'll see how silence becomes a mirror, a weight, even a kind of justice. We're not talking about silent treatment as manipulation. This isn't about playing games. This is about stoic strength. This is about protecting your peace, reclaiming your power, and letting those who disrespected you feel the consequences, not through vengeance, but through absence. If you've ever been disrespected, discarded, or misunderstood, stay with me. What we're diving into will shift the way you respond, not just to others, but to your own emotions. This is about breaking the cycle of reaction and learning the wisdom of stillness. We'll unravel why your silence shakes them more than any words ever could. And we'll uncover how true growth doesn't require shouting, it requires self-mastery. This isn't theory. It's practice. It's what Stoicism has taught for centuries, and it might just change the way you see every single conflict in your life. And trust me, the final part of this video will make everything click in a way you didn't expect. You won't want to miss it. So, are you ready to stop giving away your power and start owning your silence? Let's begin. 1. The shock they didn't expect. They expected rage. They expected you to explode, to slam doors, to fire off texts full of venom and hurt. They expected tears. A dramatic scene. They had already rehearsed in their minds how you'd react. That's the thing with people who disrespect others. They always anticipate a performance. They rely on your reaction to validate their actions. It gives them something to hold on to, a way to say, "Look, they're being emotional, irrational. I must be right." But when you give them silence instead, utter, disciplined, unmoved silence, it throws everything out of rhythm. It's like pulling the plug on a chaotic play that only thrives on drama. Suddenly, there's no script to follow, no lines to deliver. They stand there, alone on a stage built for conflict, and the curtain doesn't fall, it just never opens again. That silence? It cuts deeper than any words ever could. Because it's unexpected. It's unsettling. It's power they didn't account for. You see, Stoic relationships are not about dramatic exits or grand confrontations. They're about quiet strength. You standing calm in the middle of a storm they started, choosing not to fuel it. That's the shock. When someone disrespects you, they usually do it to feel bigger, more in control. It's rarely about truth, it's about testing your boundaries. When you don't snap, when you don't give them the satisfaction of a reaction, you suddenly become an unknown variable. Now they can't measure you. They don't know how to read you. That discomfort? It eats away at them more than your anger ever could. And here's where Stoicism comes in, not as a theory, but as an active force. It tells you, you don't have to engage in every battle you're invited to. You don't have to attend every argument. You're allowed to walk away. Not because you're afraid of the fight, but because the fight doesn't deserve you. Your silence is a reflection of inner stability, not emotional vacancy. But let's be honest, getting to that place is not easy. Your ego wants justice. Your pride wants to be heard. Your emotions scream for validation. And yet you choose silence, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You realize that those who disrespect you are not attacking your core, they're exposing theirs. Your lack of response becomes a mirror, and what they see reflected back is themselves. That's where the real shock begins. They're faced not with your reaction, but with their own actions. And when that mirror shows them something they don't like, they get uncomfortable. They question. They ruminate. They spiral. Because they don't know what your silence means. They start wondering, did they go too far? Did they lose you for good? Did you stop caring? The silence, once mistaken for weakness, becomes a loud declaration that you're no longer available for disrespect. And that realization hurts more than any argument ever could. You reclaim your dignity without needing to say a word. And don't misunderstand, this isn't about punishing people with silence. It's not about manipulation. It's about boundaries. It's about self-respect. When someone disrespects you, they're crossing a line. And when you go quiet, you're drawing a new one. Not with noise, but with grace. You're not just walking away, you're elevating. In Stoic relationships, silence is the space where healing begins, not just for you, but potentially for them too. They can only reflect when the noise stops. And you, by stepping back, create that quiet. You create the possibility for change. But whether or not they change is no longer your concern. You've already changed. You've risen above the need to be understood by someone who chose to misunderstand you. You've grown past the need for closure from a person who created chaos. And that growth? That's the shock they never expected. It's like watching someone play with fire, expecting sparks, only for the flame to die out in their hands, leaving nothing but the sting of silence and the absence of your energy. In that absence, they feel the weight of their own actions. That's when the tables turn. Not because you forced it, but because you released it. You let go. You chose stillness. And in doing so, you became untouchable. This is the power of Stoicism, not coldness, but clarity. Not detachment, but discipline. You're not ignoring what happened. You're just refusing to let it define you. You're refusing to let someone else's disrespect dictate your peace. You realize that in staying silent, you are not suppressing your feelings, you are mastering them. You're no longer reactive. You're reflective. And that calm, unshakable presence? It's exactly what they didn't expect. It's the kind of shock that lingers, not like a scream, but like a haunting whisper that never really fades. So the next time someone disrespects you and waits for your outrage, your explosion, your pain, remember this: your silence might just be the loudest message they've ever received. 2. Silence as a mirror. There's a peculiar discomfort that creeps in when someone wrongs you and expects retaliation, only to receive nothing. No reaction, no counterattack, no emotional unraveling. Just your silence. That silence isn't empty, it's reflective. It becomes a mirror, forcing the other person to stare at their own behavior without the distraction of your response. Most people don't realize how often they depend on your emotional reaction to escape their own accountability. When you stay silent, it's like removing their cover. Now, all that's left in the room is them, and the truth they tried to avoid. That's what makes silence so powerful in Stoic relationships. It's not about withholding communication, it's about allowing reality to echo back into the space they once filled with disrespect. You stop shielding them from themselves. You stop rescuing them from the discomfort they created. And you, grounded in Stoicism, choose reflection over retaliation. Think about it. How often do people disrespect others and then immediately defend their behavior with something like, "Well, they provoked me," or "They were acting crazy"? But what happens when you remove yourself from that equation? What happens when you don't give them the fuel they need to spin the story? Suddenly, there's no distraction. No chaos to hide behind. Just the hard, clear reflection of what they did. And for many, that's unbearable. Because in your silence, they're no longer looking at you, they're looking at themselves. And what they see might be ugly. Your silence doesn't erase what happened, it exposes it. It turns a fleeting moment of disrespect into a permanent stain on their conscience. It lingers. It festers. It becomes the unanswered question they carry long after the moment has passed. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you fight back? Why did you walk away so calmly, without even a glance? These questions grow louder the longer your silence lasts. They echo in the void where your presence used to be. And each time they look in that mirror, they see not your weakness, but their own failure. This is the unspoken strength of Stoic relationships. You no longer carry the weight of someone else's behavior. You return it to them, not in anger, but in stillness. You become the mirror they can't shatter, no matter how hard they try. Because your silence, rooted in self-control, cannot be manipulated. It cannot be argued with. It just is. And that just is state, that presence without effort, is one of the most powerful places a person can operate from. It's where self-respect lives. It's where peace thrives. And it's where transformation begins, not for them, but for you. Because the truth is, when you stop reacting, you start healing. You begin to see the situation not as a personal attack, but as a reflection of their inner world. You start asking Stoic questions, not, "Why did they hurt me?" But what does their behavior reveal about them? Not, "How do I get back at them?" but, "How do I stay true to my own values in the face of disrespect?" These are the questions that shift your power inward. They change the entire game. And the beautiful part? While they're stuck wondering what your silence means, you've already moved on. You've reclaimed your energy. You've elevated your mindset. You've stepped out of the emotional arena and into a space of clarity. They can't reach you there. Not because you're avoiding reality, but because you're anchored in something deeper. Something they didn't expect. Your silence becomes your message. And the message is simple: I see what you did. I'm not going to scream about it. I'm not going to beg for an apology. I'm not going to try to fix what you broke. I'm going to let you live with it. That mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't sugarcoat. And it doesn't go away when the lights turn off. It follows them. Into the night. Into their thoughts. Into every interaction they tried to have without the person they once disrespected. You. That's why silence is so unnerving. Because it's clean. It doesn't offer closure. It doesn't give answers. It just stands unwavering, reflecting back the truth. And in a world obsessed with noise, with reaction, with instant gratification, your stillness becomes the anomaly. It becomes a spiritual act. A Stoic rebellion. A statement that says, "I do not owe you chaos. I do not owe you my energy. I owe myself peace." And that peace? That's what they can't touch. So the next time someone disrespects you, and your instinct is to speak, to fight, to explain, pause. Ask yourself, what if the most powerful response I could offer is no response at all? What if my silence is not the absence of words, but the presence of self-respect? What if, in choosing stillness, I'm allowing the truth to speak for itself? And what if that truth, reflected clearly in the mirror of my silence, is the very thing that brings them face to face with their own darkness? That's not vengeance. That's victory. That's stoicism in action. That's you, choosing the high road, not for show, not for power, but for peace. And if that resonates with you, if you've ever been in that space where silence said more than any argument ever could, then do me a favor. Like this video and comment, number 1, below if you feel the power of choosing peace over chaos. And if you want more content like this, built on Stoic strength and emotional clarity, make sure to subscribe. We're just getting started. 3. The weight of unspoken judgment. There's a particular heaviness that settles in when someone senses your withdrawal. Not loud, not dramatic, but silent and final. It's not just the absence of your words, it's the quiet stripping away of your presence, your attention, your energy. This is where the weight of unspoken judgment begins to press down on them. Because you didn't fight back. You didn't send a final message. You didn't try to justify your hurt. Instead, you stepped back into yourself, and the space you left behind became a vacuum filled with the sound of their own conscience. That silence, yours, becomes a verdict without a trial. It says more than any accusation ever could. It is the nonverbal communication of someone who has assessed the situation, measured the value of confrontation, and chosen detachment over drama. In Stoic relationships, this is a crucial turning point. When someone has disrespected you, and you respond not with fury but with distance, what you've actually done is handed them the mirror and refused to narrate what they see. They are left to interpret it themselves. And that interpretation often leads to discomfort, insecurity, and eventually, regret. Because without your response to deflect to, they begin to feel the full weight of what they did. And it lingers. Longer than any insult, any counterattack, any emotional explosion. The human mind craves resolution, especially after conflict. It wants to label things, good, bad, resolved, unresolved. But when you go quiet, when you remove yourself from the narrative, you leave their story unfinished. And that, psychologically, is tormenting. It opens a loop they can't close. They start second-guessing everything. Was I too harsh? Did I go too far? Why aren't they reaching out? Are they gone for good? These aren't questions you need to answer. Because in Stoicism, the goal is not to control others, it's to control yourself. It's to let people feel the natural consequences of their actions without your interference. And the consequence of disrespecting you is not your fury, it's your absence. Your detachment. Your peace. The unshakable stillness that follows. And here's the thing about that stillness. It doesn't scream, but it unsettles. It doesn't point fingers, but it convicts. Because they know. Deep down they know. They know what they did. And they know that you know. And yet you haven't said a word. That silence becomes their burden to carry. It becomes a form of judgment more powerful than confrontation. Because it's not performative. It's not for show. It's quiet, but it's final. And in that finality, they feel everything they tried to deny. When you were present, they had a target. Someone to argue with, someone to shift blame onto. But without you, there is no distraction. Only reflection. This is the dynamic of Stoic relationships. You hold your peace, and they hold their guilt. You focus on your growth, and they sit with their actions. And even if they don't show it, they feel it. Every time they see your name and hesitate to reach out. Every time they think of the last words you didn't say. Every time they realize the silence hasn't broken. That's the weight. That's the judgment. Not because you wanted to punish them, but because you chose yourself. And let's be clear, this isn't about pride. It's not about holding grudges. It's about integrity. It's about recognizing when a line has been crossed and choosing not to debate it. When someone crosses a boundary, your silence is the gate closing behind them. You don't need to explain why. You don't need to defend your peace. Your silence is the defense. It's the statement. It's the response. And it's devastatingly clear. Because in that void, they begin to experience what life feels like without your grace, your patience, your understanding. And they realize, maybe too late, that those things were never guaranteed. That your presence was a gift. That your energy was valuable. And now it's gone. Stoicism teaches us that we are not responsible for the emotions of others, only for our own responses. And by not responding, by holding that still space, you uphold a boundary far stronger than any verbal confrontation could create. It's a boundary made of quiet dignity. And in the face of that, the person who disrespected you is left to carry their choices. Not in a courtroom, not in a conflict, but in their own mind. Day after day, thought after thought. The weight of unspoken judgment is not punishment. It's simply truth, allowed to exist without interference. And that truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. So when someone wrongs you and expects a storm, give them silence. Let them feel the calm after their chaos. Let them sit in the echo of their own actions. That echo becomes the lesson. That silence becomes the teacher. And you? You become untouchable, not because you're hiding, but because you've transcended the need for validation. You've embodied Stoicism. You've become the mirror that speaks without speaking. And that mirror shows them who they really are. 4. Emotional detachment is power. There's a difference between shutting down and rising above, and that difference is emotional detachment. Not the kind that comes from bitterness or avoidance, but the kind that grows from clarity and inner stability, the kind rooted in stoicism. When you choose not to engage with someone who disrespected you, not because you're indifferent, but because you've mastered your reactions, you are stepping into a form of power they didn't see coming. See, most people equate emotional intensity with caring. They believe if you're yelling, crying, or chasing after an apology, it means they still matter. They misinterpret chaos as connection. But when you pull away without noise, when you let them see that you're done, not from rage, but from resolve, that silence hits different. It's a quiet revolution. Because now you're no longer reacting, you're responding to life from a place of composure. You've exited the emotional battlefield and chosen the higher ground. And that's unsettling for those who were counting on your reaction to validate themselves. They wanted to see if they still had emotional access to you. When they see they don't, that you've detached, they are forced to confront a truth they didn't prepare for. They no longer hold power over you. That realization is devastating. Because now, the game is over. They can't pull your strings. They can't drag you into their storm. You've become like water, calm, still, reflective. You're no longer a puppet in their theater. You've walked off the stage. And in that decision, you gain something far more valuable than revenge. You gain freedom. This is the essence of stoicism in practice. Not becoming cold or uncaring, but choosing not to be a slave to emotional impulses. You no longer give others the keys to your peace. You hold them firmly in your own hands. And yes, there's a transition. It doesn't happen overnight. The temptation to respond, to explain, to get closure, it lingers. But every time you choose stillness over shouting, presence over performance, you reinforce your inner strength. You teach yourself that calm is not weakness. It's wisdom. And in doing so, you embody what Stoic relationships are meant to be: grounded, unshakable, and free of emotional chaos. You stop proving yourself to those who don't deserve access to your soul. You stop trying to fix what they broke. Instead, you fix your focus on your peace, your growth, your values. You understand that detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you no longer allow feelings to dictate your actions. It means you've created space between stimulus and response. And in that space lies your freedom. They might call you distant. They might accuse you of being cold. Let them. That's their discomfort speaking. They're projecting their own lack of control onto your clarity. But deep down, they know. They know they've lost access to a version of you that once tolerated the intolerable. And what's left is a version that protects peace above all else. That's a version they can't manipulate. And that's where your power is reborn. Not in proving your point. Not in winning the argument. But in walking away with your soul intact. Your silence becomes a sanctuary. Your emotional detachment becomes a shield. Not one that blocks love, but one that filters out the poison disguised as affection. You realize that not everyone deserves your emotional availability. Not everyone is worthy of your energy. And when someone shows you through disrespect that they don't value your presence, you take your presence away, not as a punishment, but as a principle. That's the power they didn't expect. That's the line they didn't think you'd draw. And once you do, it becomes irreversible. Because once you taste peace, chaos becomes unattractive. Once you learn to love your solitude, toxic company loses its charm. You no longer chase validation from people who invalidate your worth. You no longer lose sleep over people who sleep well after disrespecting you. Your detachment becomes a declaration. I am no longer available for disrespect. I am no longer negotiating my value. I am no longer explaining my boundaries. I am simply living them. And that way of living, it radiates. It sends a message louder than any words: I've outgrown this. I've moved on. I've elevated. And that elevation? That's where they can't follow. Because to meet you there, they'd have to do the work. They'd have to own their actions, face the mirror, choose growth over ego. And not everyone is willing. So they stay behind, wondering how silence became so heavy, how detachment became so painful. But you don't look back. Because Stoicism isn't about convincing others, it's about conquering yourself. So if you're feeling this, if you've ever detached for your own peace, if you've chosen calm over chaos, if you've felt your power return through silence, drop a number 1 in the comments and like this video. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're diving deeper into Stoic strength, emotional mastery, and the kind of clarity that changes how you live, love, and let go. 5. Reclaiming your peace. Reclaiming your peace isn't a single decision, it's a practice, a daily commitment to yourself that begins in the quiet moments after disrespect and betrayal. It starts not with loud declarations, but with subtle shifts. How you stop explaining yourself to those who misunderstand you on purpose, how you stop chasing closure from those who thrive on chaos, and how you stop allowing disrespect to live rent-free in your mind. That's the unseen work of peace. It's the quiet rebuilding that no one applauds but that changes everything. In Stoic relationships, peace is the most sacred possession, not something handed to you, but something earned through discernment, boundaries, and restraint. When someone crosses a line, your reaction isn't about hurting them, it's about honoring yourself. And often, the best way to honor yourself is by walking away with your integrity intact and your silence loud. The moment you decide not to argue, not to plead, not to re-expose your wounds for someone to minimize them again, you are reclaiming your peace. And while that might feel lonely at first, what you're actually doing is clearing space for clarity, for healing, for self-respect to settle back in. Disrespect clouds the mind and stirs the heart into a frenzy, pulling you into a storm that's not yours to weather. But when you step back, when you stop letting their noise disturb your inner stillness, you remember who you are. Not the version of you that reacted to pain, but the version that protects peace above all. That's where power is reborn. That's where Stoicism stops being philosophy and becomes lived experience. Because peace doesn't mean passive. It means prioritized. It means you've chosen to create a life where disrespect doesn't have a voice. And that begins with silence. With not responding to every provocation. With not defending yourself to someone who refuses to listen. With not dragging yourself into emotional courts where there is no justice. You reclaim your peace by opting out of narratives that exhaust you. You reclaim it by no longer needing to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. And it's not always easy. Sometimes, the habit of conflict is familiar. Sometimes, the ego wants to win. But in Stoicism, you learn that true victory isn't dominance, it's discipline. It's the ability to feel anger and not act on it. To feel pain and not let it define your identity. To walk away not because you're weak, but because your spirit is tired of unnecessary wars. Every time you choose peace over proving a point, you are declaring that your energy is sacred. And those declarations add up. They reshape your world. People may not understand your silence. They may accuse you of being heartless, distant, or arrogant. Let them. Their perception isn't your responsibility. Your responsibility is your inner world. Your thoughts, your reactions, your peace. And peace, once reclaimed, becomes the new filter. You begin to notice the people who drain it. The habits that sabotage it. The environments that disrespect it. And without needing a dramatic exit, you simply remove yourself. Quietly. Steadily. With purpose. This is the art of Stoicism, not in suppressing emotion, but in channeling it with wisdom. Not in avoiding pain, but in not letting pain own you. When you've been disrespected, and you don't retaliate, but instead retreat into your inner sanctuary, you are teaching yourself what safety feels like. You are reminding yourself that peace is not dependent on apologies. It is not delayed until someone else takes accountability. It is available now, in your breath, in your boundaries, in your ability to say, "This is not for me," and leave. That ability changes your entire experience. Suddenly, you're not reacting, you're choosing. You're not overwhelmed, you're grounded. You're not trying to fix someone, you're focusing on yourself. And in that focus, your self-worth expands. You begin to attract differently, speak differently, live differently. Because when peace becomes your standard, everything else either rises to meet it or fades away. And yes, some relationships will end. Some connections won't survive your new boundaries. But those losses are actually gains. They make space for alignment, for authenticity, for stoic relationships that are rooted in mutual respect, not emotional warfare. That's what reclaiming your peace is really about, not escaping life, but elevating it. Not avoiding conflict, but choosing which battles are even worth showing up for. And more often than not, they're not. Because your peace is too valuable to gamble for temporary validation. Too sacred to be surrendered to someone else's mood. And too hard-earned to be sacrificed just to feel momentarily right. The silence you maintain after disrespect is not an empty pause. It's a full decision. A decision to invest in your future self. A decision to break cycles. A decision to walk the path of self-mastery, even when it's misunderstood. And as you continue choosing peace, something profound happens. You stop needing permission to protect your spirit. You stop needing others to agree with your decisions. You stop explaining why you chose stillness over struggle. Because the peace you reclaim becomes your new voice, your new presence, your new power. It says, without words, I am whole. I am clear. I am free. And nothing, no disrespect, no betrayal, no loss, can touch that now. That's the promise of Stoicism, not as an escape from life, but as a gateway into the deepest, most powerful version of yourself. The one who no longer needs to fight to be seen. Because you see yourself. And that's more than enough. 6. The long-term consequences for them. When you walk away in silence after being disrespected, the effects don't just last for a day or a week. They extend far beyond the moment. They begin a slow but certain unraveling in the mind of the one who caused the pain. At first, they may feel victorious. They may think your silence is submission, your calm is surrender. But with time, they begin to notice what your absence really means. The texts don't come. The reactions they counted on never arrive. The validation they secretly fed on disappears. And what's left in the void is their own conscience, amplified by the echo of what they've done. The silence that once seemed like nothing becomes a haunting presence, reminding them that you're gone, not in anger, but in evolution. And that's what stings the most. Because people expect anger. They expect drama. What they don't expect is indifference. They don't expect the stillness that says, "You're no longer part of my peace." That's the kind of silence that lingers. It follows them into future conversations. Into their next relationship. Into the quiet moments they used to share with you. Because now, every space you used to fill is empty, and they know why. They remember the moment they crossed the line. They remember that you didn't fight, didn't scream, didn't beg. You just stopped. That memory becomes a quiet ghost in their mind. Not loud, but ever present. It shows up in moments of stillness, in the faces of others, in situations where they realize that what they had with you wasn't normal. It was rare. It was peaceful. It was real. And now it's gone. The long-term consequences aren't just about regret. They're about revelation. Over time, they start to connect the dots. They realize that the silence wasn't weakness. It was a boundary. That your detachment wasn't a tactic. It was growth. And they feel it, especially when the next person doesn't offer the same grace, the same patience, the same understanding. That's when the reality sets in. They didn't lose someone passive, they lost someone powerful. Someone who chose not to retaliate, not to explain, but to elevate. And that kind of loss doesn't fade. It deepens. Because it wasn't just a missed connection, it was a missed opportunity for transformation. In Stoic relationships, when someone walks away in silence, it's not out of cowardice, it's out of clarity. It's a message without words that says, "I've outgrown this pattern." And the one left behind is forced to sit with what that says about them. They're not just mourning your absence, they're mourning their inability to rise with you. That's a burden they carry into every future attempt to connect. And even if they try to move on quickly, even if they pretend your silence didn't matter, that quiet judgment lives rent-free in the back of their mind. It shows up in comparisons, in unresolved questions, in late-night reflections that whisper, "You had something valuable, and you let it go." This is where Stoicism offers a quiet kind of justice, not through revenge, but through consequence. You don't have to make them feel what they've done. Life will. Their own conscience will. And over time, as they realize that not everyone will offer the same space for growth, the same level of peace, they begin to see the magnitude of what they lost. That realization is not instantaneous. It comes in waves. It builds with each failed attempt to recreate what they had with you. With each person who doesn't tolerate what you endured. With each moment where they need what you once gave so freely, and it's not there. That's when the silence hits the hardest. Not in the beginning, but in the aftershocks. In the ripple effects that stretch across their timeline. And while they live with that echo, you live in a space of freedom. You've moved on, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You've stepped into a version of yourself that no longer entertains chaos. That no longer needs closure from someone who chose confusion. That no longer explains your peace to people who profit from your pain. And the contrast becomes their lesson. The stillness becomes your power. You don't have to look back. Because what you left behind will continue to teach them, in your absence, what your presence once meant. That is the long-term consequence they never predicted. And if this resonates with you, if you've ever stepped away in silence and felt your power rise with every step, go ahead and like this video, drop number 1 in the comments, and subscribe. Because we're just getting started unlocking the deep, transformative wisdom of Stoicism and what it means to thrive in Stoic relationships. 7. When to break the silence, and when not to. There comes a moment in every journey of stillness where you ask yourself, is this silence still serving my peace, or has it become a prison? Stoicism teaches us the value of restraint, of measured response, of refusing to be ruled by emotion. But it also teaches clarity, the ability to act when action is right, to speak when silence has done its part. So when someone has disrespected you and you've chosen the path of silence, the question isn't just whether to remain quiet, it's whether your silence is still coming from strength. Because silence, when rooted in pride or fear, can become avoidance. But silence rooted in clarity and self-respect is always powerful. That's why the decision to break it must be intentional, not emotional. You don't speak because you're provoked. You speak because the moment calls for clarity, not reaction. And here lies the wisdom of Stoic relationships. Not all conflicts must be engaged, but not all silences should be permanent. The balance is in knowing when the silence has accomplished its purpose. If the other person has shown remorse, if growth is evident, if mutual respect is possible again, then your voice may become a bridge, not a battleground. But if your silence has been met with more disrespect, with indifference, with manipulation disguised as concern, then you must honor your stillness as the boundary it was always meant to be. Breaking silence should never come at the expense of your dignity. You don't owe closure to those who never offered care. You don't owe explanations to those who ignored your pain. But sometimes, silence can create misunderstanding, not accountability. And in those rare cases, your words can illuminate what your silence could not, your values, your limits, your truth. Not to convince, but to clarify. Not to reopen wounds, but to make your peace known. Stoicism is not muteness. It's discernment. The ability to choose your words as carefully as your silences. To know when your voice brings peace and when it invites unnecessary chaos. That's the art. That's the line. There are moments where speaking brings healing. When a conversation allows for mutual understanding, growth, reconciliation. But only if both sides are prepared to meet each other in honesty. If the ground isn't safe, if the motives aren't clear, then silence remains the highest form of wisdom. Because silence protects what is sacred. It preserves what words might distort. And while the world may push you to explain, to speak up, to prove your side, Stoicism reminds you that not everything deserves your voice. Sometimes your silence is the most articulate thing you can offer. It says, I am no longer participating in cycles that exhaust my spirit. It says, I have found clarity, and it does not require conversation. And yet, when the silence has become too heavy, when it no longer brings peace but creates confusion, when withholding your truth is no longer serving you but suffocating you, then, and only then, should you speak. But even then, you speak not to be heard, but to honor your truth. You speak not to win, but to be whole. You speak not for them, but for you. And that voice, tempered by silence, becomes powerful. It carries the weight of thought, of restraint, of reflection. It is not noise, it is direction. This is where Stoicism breathes, in the space between silence and speech, where the wise pause and ask, what will bring the most peace? And not temporary peace. Lasting peace. Because the right words at the wrong time are still wrong. But the right words, spoken from clarity, from calm, from grounded strength, those words move mountains. They don't demand. They reveal. And if you decide that breaking the silence is necessary, do it with grace. Without blame. Without venom. Let your tone be steady. Let your message be simple. Let your words close the loop, not restart the fight. That's the power of breaking silence with intention. And know this, if silence has served its purpose, and your voice is ready to return, you owe no apology for your pause. Your stillness was strength, not neglect. It was the preparation for truth, not the avoidance of it. And if silence is still the right answer, you owe no explanation for your boundaries. Let those who value your presence rise to meet your peace. Let your energy remain sacred. And let Stoicism be your guide, not as a rule book of withdrawal, but as a compass toward inner clarity. Because in the end, whether you speak or stay silent, the goal is the same: peace, self-respect, emotional mastery. And every decision made from that place, silence or speech, is the right one. Silence is not a sign of defeat, it is the sound of someone who has mastered themselves. It is not weakness, but wisdom. When you are disrespected and you choose not to retaliate, not to scream, not to shrink, but instead to stand still in your own truth, you are demonstrating a level of power that words often fail to capture. In the world of Stoicism, silence is not passive, it is decisive. It is the moment you recognize that not every offense deserves your energy, not every betrayal deserves your voice. It is the sacred pause where you reclaim your peace, reevaluate your standards, and realign with your values. In Stoic Relationships, silence becomes the filter. It shows you who notices your absence, who respects your boundaries, and who only valued your reaction. And when you see that clearly, you begin to navigate life differently. You start choosing presence over performance, peace over proving points, clarity over chaos. Your silence starts setting new terms. Not through manipulation, but through self-respect. And over time, that respect becomes your shield. You stop negotiating your value with those who cannot recognize it. You stop inviting people into your life who treat your heart like it's replaceable. And you start building a reality rooted in truth, in discipline, in grace. That's the essence of Stoicism, not as detachment from life, but as the deep engagement with it, through awareness and control. You're not trying to win battles, you're ending wars that were never worth your time. And in that stillness you grow. You evolve. You become someone who no longer needs noise to feel alive, who no longer needs conflict to feel validated. You begin to radiate peace, not as a mask, but as your new baseline. That is your power. That is your transformation. And those who disrespected you, they begin to feel the consequences not because you forced them, but because your absence reveals what your presence once gave them. Calm, acceptance, love, safety. And once that's gone, they start to see. They start to feel. They start to regret. But by then, you've already built a new version of yourself, one who doesn't wait for others to catch up. One who walks in silence not to hide, but because the noise is beneath you now. And that silence? It's not empty. It's filled with strength. With boundaries. With purpose. And that is what they never expected. If you felt something shift in you today, if you recognize the power of silence, the discipline of Stoicism, and the strength of your own growth, then this video was for you. Go ahead and like this video and comment, number 1, below if you've ever chosen your peace over a pointless argument. And if you want more content that strengthens your mind, sharpens your presence, and helps you thrive in Stoic relationships, make sure to subscribe. We're building something deep here, something real. Thank you for spending your time with me. Stay grounded, stay clear, and never forget, sometimes, the loudest message you can send is silence.